So we have Robert Shibley here, one of the critical conversation speakers for this semester on campus, here to talk about FIRE. So just talk a little bit about what that is and what that organization does.
Yeah, sure. FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, and we defend First Amendment rights as well as due process on college and university campuses across America. So that includes freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of expression, and due process, of course, is fair procedures when students are charged with a campus offense.
So I know Auburn just recently gained FIRE's highest distinction for bringing its free speech completely up to code with the First Amendment. So what does that kind of mean for students on campus now?
Well, the most important thing that it means is that students don't have to fear that their speech is going to be more restricted on campus than it would be off campus or at another campus that does have full rights. One of the things that I think a lot of students don't realize is that you live in a place, it's kind of a total environment where you have you live together, you work together, you dine together, and there are rules that govern everything. And I think a lot of times students don't realize, because they're not really exposed so much to what you might call the outside world in some ways. And I know that's not fair to say that about all students, but they don't always realize that they have the same level of expressive rights on campus as they do off campus. Often universities discourage students from expressing themselves through protest, even through freedom of the press, and through something as simple as handing out pamphlets on campuses. And now students at Auburn don't have to worry about getting caught in that sort of netherworld of, well, I really thought we had this First Amendment, I thought we could hand out pamphlets, or I thought we could say this in the newspaper, but we actually can't. That's no longer a concern at Auburn, and the fact that it is a concern at most schools in the U.S. Is really a shame.
It's one of 38 universities that currently,
right.
Yep. Okay.
Only 8% of the schools we rated 460 or so schools this year, and only 8% of them, 38 schools, were green light schools.
That's not a lot. What does that mean? I guess, what does the highest distinction and everything just mean for faculty and for people that work at the university?
Well, I think there are some real advantages for folks who work at the university. The speech codes that we rate as part of this system only apply to students. Sometimes faculty also have unconstitutional restrictions, although those are more rare, but they're still there. Sometimes you can find faculty getting in trouble for things they say, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my speech later today. But what it does mean is that if Auburn managed to, and I think with programs like this, I think they will, communicate to folks that, hey, you know what, on this campus, we defend free expression. You're going to hear things that you don't like. You're going to hear things that are sometimes painful to hear, and it's your responsibility as an informed, citizen of our country and an informed citizen of the world to make, to engage in that kind of argumentation, to learn from that sort of thing. I think the advantage is that Auburn can say, when somebody says, Auburn, we demand that you silence this person, Auburn can say, that's not our business here. It is your business to combat bad speech with more speech, which is the way you actually change minds.
So I know you went to school at Duke and you worked at the paper there. What kind of censorship did you kind of see there?
Well, it was interesting. I didn't, at the time as an undergrad, I didn't really realize this sort of, the restrictions were almost funnier to us. We kind of felt like we were sort of cool underground folks. All the other newspapers had an office, but we weren't allowed to have an office. So we would lay out the paper in my dorm room or have our meetings in various dorm rooms or just classrooms that we sort of shanghaied. We also, I think the biggest problem is we weren't allowed to pass out our paper in the bins that were available for all the other undergraduate publications. We were allowed to put our paper on the ground next to the bins or somewhere around there. And so because it was on the ground and not in the bins, and also because there was a certain amount of hostility, people would frequently throw the newspaper away. They would just grab the whole stack and throw them in the trash or the recycle bins. And so one of our jobs passing out the paper was actually, after you passed out the paper, the next few days go by and pull it back out of the recycle bins. So that was kind of funny, and we were kind of, as kind of an underground experience. But what it really did do, and this was, in the very early days of, we all had email, but the internet was sort of or not what it is today. There really wasn't another way to get the message out besides these papers. Everybody picked up the newspapers, and it was hard to get ours, and so that really did disadvantage our newspaper, and it continues to happen at schools, although I think less and less across the country.
So yeah, definitely less and less. How have you kind of seen that progress throughout the years?
Well, I think the internet's made a big difference in the sense that the barriers to communication and putting up a website and doing the reporting have been lowered a lot. Where we've actually seen a weird increase when it comes to freedom of the press problems is with the official newspapers. Often they have advisors who are faculty members. I remember one at East Carolina University, this incident we had. A streaker had gone across the field at a football game, and the newspaper put a picture, not a zoomed in picture or anything, but just a picture of the streaker running across the field on the cover. And the university disciplined, and I think ultimately, I may be misstating this, but they drove the newspaper advisor to quit because they said, look, advisor, your job is to stop them from doing things like this. Now, it's certainly a newsworthy thing. I mean, that was what everybody was talking about on Monday after the game, so it's certainly worth being in the newspaper. But here, they were telling the advisor, you should have told the students that they aren't allowed to put this in the paper. And that's not their job. That's not the job of a student newspaper advisor. And at a public university, it would be unconstitutional for it to be their job. There isn't a minder to tell you what the student news can say.
Why is free speech in higher education just overall important?
Well, without free speech, the mechanism of higher education can't function. There's a real analog, a similarity between the sort of political process of free speech we have and what you might call like the scientific process or the scientific method. In science, you advance a hypothesis, and then you put it out there, you test it, and then if somebody doesn't believe you, they try to replicate your experiment. If they can't, that throws doubt on the experiment. It works kind of the same way in terms of political speech. People put out ideas. If they're bad ideas, they tend to get shot down. If they're good ideas, they tend to advance. Now, that's sort of an optimistic way of looking at it. I know a lot of people have doubts about the ideas that you see out there today, but I think that's belied, at least by American history. We've seen really an increase in inequality, injustice throughout the years, and I think it's been shown that when people peacefully disagree and they peacefully debate things, eventually the better ideas do win out. That's been a real genius of our founding fathers, and it needs to happen on college campuses as well. Otherwise, how are we going to know that we are finding out the right theories or learning the right things if people are too afraid to challenge it?
So how can students best exercise free speech on campus, especially when they're at those universities that aren't that don't have this distinction and that aren't completely up to code with the First Amendment?
Well, it's important. I mean, one of the things they can do is work with an organization like FIRE sometimes to challenge those speech codes. At Auburn, you're not going to be able to do that since the speech codes have been eliminated, but I would certainly urge students at other places to do that. But if you want to get your message out without getting in trouble, it's worth getting really familiar with your student code. Usually there's some way to communicate, and what I would advise them to do is to start to use the rights that they are willing to give you to advocate for the rights that they aren't. So let's say you're not allowed to pass out pamphlets, but you are allowed to have a protest. Maybe you have a protest about passing out pamphlets, etc. And sort of go from there. I think that would be the best way to do it. What of course, would be the worst way to do it would be to engage in some kind of violence in order to do that. And I think even though we've seen a bit of an uptick in violence lately on campuses, I think people seem to be backing away from that. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is that we need to work these things out peacefully. And we need to have these open debates and dialogues with one another.
Yeah, and just like in the wake of more violence on campus, why is it important to have these kind of conversations about free speech?
Well, I think it's important to have conversations about free speech because I don't think students are necessarily coming to colleges with a full conception of what free speech really means. You sort of turn 18 and a lot of rights kind of turn on for you. And it's not that you don't have free speech in high school, but it's much more limited. But you turn 18, you head for college, and you could be drafted, you can fight in a war, you can get killed. There are a lot of different things you can do. You can vote in the political process. And so it's important for students to realize that free speech is necessary to be a functioning member of a liberal democracy.
And then we've had several conservative speakers come speak on campus. Most recently, Richard Spencer was here in the spring. How have these kind of speakers just kind of impacted free speech and the speech codes that are present on so many campuses?
Well, I mean, certainly that's presented a challenge to those of us in the free speech community. One of the things that we're called to do as free speech advocates is to defend the right of people to say things regardless of the viewpoints of those people. And throughout most of my time at FIRE, there really hasn't been, one of the things we used to say is we've never actually run into a campus chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, for instance. And I still don't know that there are any campus chapters, but we are starting to see groups of nationalist groups, or whatever you might call it, rise up on campus. And that may just be a generational thing. I think every generation has had its groups that almost everyone cannot stand and would love to hear silenced. And it's important to remember that if you are somebody who wants to combat extremism, whatever it might be, or you're somebody who wants to advance tolerance, or whatever it is, even if you're somebody who wants to advance these bad behaviors, you need to be put in a position where you have to convince people that your ideas are right. And so Thomas Jefferson said when he was founding the University of Virginia, he said, we're creating a place where error is we're allowed to have errors as long as reason is left free to combat it. And I have faith in our college students today, and I think most people, if they think about it, really would, that when you have the chance to actually engage with and discuss these issues with some of these speakers, I think it can be very clarifying in a way that simply, sort of saying on Twitter, I hate this guy, he's the worst, punch a Nazi or whatever, can't. Punch a Nazi isn't an argument. Let's make an argument and see how those work out. And I think folks at Auburn, from watching the videos of that, I think the people who attended probably know what I'm talking about, what that experience is like.
How does FIRE kind of partner with students at universities to work through these kind of speech codes?
Well, FIRE has a FIRE student network. We have thousands of students across the country who get our emails, and they keep track of the things that are going on their campuses, and sometimes organize in order to engage in activism for free speech on that campus. We also bring lawsuits on behalf of students sometimes. I'll talk about one or two of those in my speech today. Students who are willing to step up and challenge those things. And for those who care about free speech and just sort of want to make the point about it, we have activity kits that we come out with every semester. We have a summer internship, which we'd urge folks to apply to from. It's a paid summer internship at our headquarters in Philly. We're just trying to, and we also have a summer conference in Philadelphia that is, if you apply and you get accepted, it's free to go, and we pay for your travel, and at the National Constitution Center, and talk about these issues. So we really want to get the word out to students about the importance of free speech, because these are going to be, it's cheesy to say, oh, it's the leaders of tomorrow, et cetera, but it is. And if students are coming out of college thinking that free speech is something that's not important, they're going to take that on with them, and eventually that will seep into society, it'll seep into the law, and that'll be destructive for our liberal democracy.
Definitely. That's about all I had, so we're definitely looking forward to your speech tonight, and thank you so much for stopping in, taking the time to talk to us.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.